So, first and foremost, I want to thank you all for making the time to join today. Any special some special thanks for the speakers that we have here today. I know in the previous sessions I have been telling you how excited we are for this particular session, because this session is actually going to set the foundation for the collective mission that we have as part of this hackathon. And in order to do that, we will be able to understand a little bit more about what modern slavery is, where we are in our efforts to combat it, and why we need so much technological solutions and skill sets such as the ones that you are bringing into this event to accelerate the work that we're doing in order to achieve this goal of eradicating modern slavery. We have a stellar lineup of speakers, very diverse, and we are so excited to learn from them, from all their extensive experience. So before we start the session, I would like to invite the speakers to introduce themselves, to know a little bit more about their background, and then we will have the opportunity to dive into some presentation and learn something a little bit more concrete from their experience. So maybe I'll ask Matt to have the first introduction.
My name is Matt Friedman. I'm based in Hong Kong. I run an organization, excuse me, called the Mekong Club. We work with the private sector in a positive, supportive way. Thank you.
Thank you. Karola?
Hello, good morning. My name is Karola de la Cuesta. I am a survivor and an advocate from Mexico, and I'm happy to be here joining everything I can bring into the table.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Hi, I'm Charlotte Gwynn. I work at Walk Free, which is a human rights organisation based in Perth, Western Australia, of all places. I work as part of the business and government engagement team there, and we essentially measure the scale of modern slavery and then also engage with businesses and governments to try and drive change. Thanks.
Thank you. Douglas?
Yes, I'm Doug Gilmer. I spent 35 years in law enforcement. The last 25 years of my career, I spent as a special agent with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and ended up retiring as the senior law enforcement advisor at the Department of Homeland Security's Center for Countering Human Trafficking. Today, I serve as the president of Resolve Strategies, a global justice solutions group.
Thank you. Natalie?
Hello, everyone. I'm Natalie Maxwell-Davis, and I am the Senior Manager for Modern Slavery Prevention and Response at Australian Red Cross.
Thank you. And Briony?
Hi, I'm Briony. I work for International Justice Mission. We're based in Sydney, Australia, and our mission is to protect people in poverty from violence and slavery.
Thank you. So as you see, we have an incredible panel ahead, so a lot of experience to learn from. And before I ask Matthew to open these sessions and set the context of what is modern slavery and where we are in our journey to combat it, I would like to start with a small story just to give you a sense of why I'm so excited also to have this panel, and a bit of anecdotal story on how one small event can really shape the course of your life and your career. And that happened to me exactly 10 years ago. I was a student, an exchange student at the Hong Kong University, and I was studying international relations. And in one of our lectures, which was called Humanity in Globalization, we have a guest speaker. And that guest speaker was Matt. And he came and tell us about what is modern slavery and how it looks like, and different projects that exist in the region. And I remember being in my third year of international relations and listening to this lecture and thinking, how come I don't know anything about this? Because when you're studying international relations, you're are being taught about all the bad things that are happening in the world, from poverty to war and conflict. And I was really surprised that we had so little knowledge by being so advanced in our bachelor's on this. And that day I went to the library and I started Googling what is modern slavery and who's doing research on this. And of course, I came first also across the Walk Free Global Slavery Index. And since that day, I start researching on this topic and I thought, this is what I want to work on. How can I bring my skills into this topic? And it's been 10 years, and I think it hasn't been one day where I haven't read about or tried to do something in this field. So I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to listen from these incredible speakers again, and also hoping that maybe some of you throughout this event will get some inspiration and see more people with diverse skills working in the fight against modern slavery. So I just wanted to mention that, and to now maybe pass it back to Matt to tell us more about what modern slavery is. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that statement. I don't remember the exact presentation, but I've done a lot of presentations at Hong Kong U, and you never know which students are going to react, because we as human beings don't pick our causes pick us. And there's something about the DNA of all of those who are on this call today that draws us to this particular topic. And hopefully, as a result of what we're going to be presenting to you, we'll have the same impact on some of you there. When most people think about human trafficking, modern slavery, they think about the picture in the left-hand corner of this slide, for good reason. There's 6.3 million women and girls in forced prostitution. Just to give you a story of my experience, 35 years ago, I was living and working in Nepal. I was a public health officer, and we were finding girls that are 12, 13 years old who are HIV positive, couldn't understand what was going on. So we went to the shelters to interview them, and we heard pretty much the same story over and over again. And it went something like this. A human trafficker would go into a village, flash a bunch of money around, say he's looking for a wife. Say, I don't want an urban wife, I want a village wife. He'd find a girl 12 years old, befriend her, go to the family and say, I'd like to marry your daughter. They're thinking, wow, he's rich, he's handsome, going to take care of our daughter, going to take care of us. In that part of the world, it's quite common to marry at that particular age. After they have the wedding ceremony, he goes to the family and says, I'm going to take your daughter to Kathmandu for a couple of months, but I'll be back in 3 months. But that's not what's going to happen. Instead, he takes her to Mumbai, India, to the red light district. When he gets there, he puts his wife into a room and says, honey, stay here. I'll be back in a few minutes. As she was coming in, she saw these people milling around in funny clothes. She said, no, 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 no. I don't want to go. I'm scared. Stay with me. He says, it's all right. He then goes to the madam to get the $500 for having sold her to the brothel. He has the gold from the wedding, and he hands the wedding pictures over. He then leaves to go to Nepal to do this again and again, maybe 40, 50 times in the year. The madam then goes into the room where the girl is and says, guess what? Your husband just sold you to me, and you're going to be with 20 guys a day, every day, because I say so. You can imagine this girl's shocked. No, 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 my husband loves me. No, that's what happened. When many of these girls hear this story that they're going to be with these men, they say, well, I'll kill myself before I do those shameful things. Madam then brings out the photo of the wedding and says, is this your mom, your dad, your brother? If you hurt yourself, we'll hurt them. So she's trapped in this situation. After that, they bring in a bunch of men and they use her over and over again until she eventually just lays back and accepts whatever happens to her. After that, she's put on the line. She'll be with 20 guys a day, every day, until after a couple of years, she's so depleted physically and emotionally that they throw her out on the street. So this is just one example of the 6.3 million women and girls in this type of situation. There's also boys and men involved as well, but it gives you a sense of the fact that a person loses control of their life, controlled by somebody else, and then forced into this situation where they have to be with people on a regular basis. But it's not just women and girls, men and boys. Right-hand photo, fishing boat in Thailand. Boy from Cambodia is told that he has to go to Thailand and get a job. The family's poor. You have to send money back. Goes down there looking for work, doesn't find it. Human traffickers see this. They go up to him and say, hey, brother, you're from Cambodia. We're from Cambodia. Let me help you out. Let me lend you some money. Okay, well, now that you have my money, you have to stay with me. But guess what? I got this great job. I'm going to take you down to the ocean, put you on a boat. The boat's going to go out for a couple of months. You'll catch some fish. You're a guy. Guys love fishing, right? After that, boat will come in, you'll be a hero to your family. Goes down to the boat, gets on the boat, doesn't realize he's been sold onto the boat. Boat goes out, but it doesn't come back after 3 months. Stays out there for 4 years. This poor kid will end up working 14, 15 hours a day, every day. If he doesn't, he gets beaten, he gets tortured. Only food he'll get the entire time he's there is rice and fish. They often give strong drugs in order to get him to work. If he gets injured, if he gets sick, throw him off the side of the boat. At the end of the 4 years, the boat comes in, doesn't get anything. So these are kind of extreme cases of human trafficking. These are the cases where a person loses control of their life. They don't have a say in what they do and how they do it. And as a result of that, it falls into this category of what we're talking about today. But there are other cases as well. I was in Singapore and I presented to a pharmaceutical company. And after I finished, they said, well, we're a very sophisticated company. We don't have any vulnerability associated with human trafficking. So I asked them, well, how do you get your product from the warehouse to the pharmacies? And they said, well, we use third-party contract transport companies. I asked them if they ever looked into whether or not there would be an issue associated with it. They said no. 2 weeks later, they called me and they said, we found a problem and we were brought in to help. I went to a law firm in Singapore, same thing. They said, we're a law firm. We don't have any supply chains. We don't have any products. We don't have any vulnerability. Who cleaned your building? Don't know. They looked into it and 2 weeks later they came back. So this idea of human trafficking being only in certain categories is a myth. If people can take advantage of other people, they do, and you find it all over the place. And that's why we're talking about the fact that there are 50 million people in modern slavery. More people in modern slavery now than any other time in history. Now, if I had done this presentation 2 years ago, the number would have been 40 million. It went up basically because of COVID. You have a significant number of people who are in desperate situations. So let's say that you had a woman, she was working in a factory, all of a sudden COVID hits, and what it does is it shuts down the factory, not for days or weeks or months, but for years. She borrows money, can't pay that money back, traffickers come and basically take people away. As a result of that, we have a significant increase in this. When it comes to the numbers, there's 50 million. You're going to hear the detailed numbers from Walk Free, so I'm not going to get into it. But most people think that within forced labor, a disproportionate amount is forced prostitution. It only represents about a quarter of the cases. But what's really relevant and important, and a lot of people don't know this, is that out of the forced labor cases, which represents about 3/4 of the cases, 86% of them are associated with supply chains. This is where we get our phones and our clothes and our food and our fish and so forth. And so the private sector needs to be involved in addressing this. And I'm sure that as part of what it is you're talking about, you'll get into that. When it comes to who's supposed to be addressing this issue, well, it's supposed to be governments. I've worked with over 43 governments around the world. Governments do things, but usually not enough in order to have a significant impact. And you'll see the reason why in a few minutes when I give you some statistics on the number of people that were helped last year. So they set up the programs that are supposed to have the legal responses. They're supposed to do the raids and rescues and go after the criminals and so forth. They do this, but it hasn't had a significant impact. I worked for the United Nations for 6 years. I believe in the United Nations system, but I spent a lot of time in 5-star hotels eating really good food, debating and discussing the issue, partly because my organization did a lot of kind of esoteric, theoretical type of work. And so it's really the NGOs that are doing most of the work. They're the ones that are out there kind of doing the frontline activities. They're the ones that are doing the prevention activities, going after the criminals, helping the victims and so forth. But again, if we go back to the statistics, actually, this should be 82%. If 82% of what we're dealing with is dealing with the private sector also needs to be involved. And that's part of the reason why hackathons are done. Private sector people come together in order to identify how there are skills and abilities that exist beyond the NGO world in order to address these kind of issues. So what I'm going to show you now is the report card for the number of people that were helped out of modern slavery last year out of the 50 million. So think in your mind with all the United Nations and the NGOs and the governments working together, what a good number would be. And then out of 500,000 greed incentivized criminals, I'm going to show you how many prosecutions took place or convictions took place last year. And these are the statistics. Last year, according to the Trafficking in Persons report, about 133,000 out of 50 million. That's 0.2% of the victims. Now, obviously, there are victims that come and go that aren't reported, but what we're really talking about is a small percentage of people that are actually helped with resources that are available through all of these responders that we're talking about. As for convictions, about 6,000 out of 500,000 green incentivized criminals. Now, when you look at this, you might ask the question, does the counter-trafficking world not care? Are they not doing what they're supposed to be doing? What would account for these numbers being so low? That's not the issue. The issue is this: the profits generated from modern slavery are obscene, $236 billion. You know, in fact, there's another calculation that recently came out that it said it's closer to $500 billion. Now, up until recently, the estimate around the world for the response to this was about $400 million. That's actually been halved because the US government has stopped providing development systems around the world. And so here you have 0.13% of the profits generated by modern slavery. You can see now why it is that we're less than 1% of documented cases related to this. And that's the reason why we need these remedies. We need organizations and individuals to come up with silver bullet approaches that are going to help us to be able to make a difference. Another thing that we see is that the scale of this, the number of people globally that fight this is about 50,000 people. We have to follow rules and regulations and rule of law, and we have to do our progress reports, and we have to get our, fundraising documents in and so forth. If you're a criminal, you don't have to do any of those things. Somebody comes after that, you mutate, you evolve, you change whatever it is that you're going to be able to do. You hurt somebody. And so obviously it's an unfair advantage. And lastly, going back to the statement that was made earlier, awareness is low. I do 150 presentations a year to groups as big as 5,000 people. And I often ask them, as I'm in the process of talking, how many of you knew 20% of what I was talking about before I said it today? I don't get any hands. If you don't know about an issue, you're not going to care. If you don't care, you're not going to do anything. It's extremely important that we get people to know about this, but it's not your fault. We in the counter-trafficking world haven't done a good enough job to sensitize and create the awareness, and that's the reason why we do these events. So what you have here today is something really important. You can use your innovation, your ideas, your experience to come up with ideas that fall outside of the realm of what we're used to seeing, and I really appreciate everyone taking the time to step up and be a part of this process. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you, Matt, so much for highlighting this context and also emphasizing on the urgency of why we need to bring people with such a diverse background to help us accelerate the work that we're doing. And also we had a question earlier today, or a small discussion on how strange this hackathon is, or unique compared to the others, because we spend so much time having these panels and having these sessions of teaching before actually getting to the hacking. And the reason for that is this awareness that we want to build. And thank you for emphasizing how much needed that is. And to continue this presentation, I would like to invite Karola de la Cuesta, and we are in for a treat because we have here a survivor of modern slavery who is willing to share with us her story and also to tell us key lessons that people that maybe have never heard about modern slavery will be able to learn from her. So Karola, thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you, everyone. Well, this is my book. I am Karola de la Cuesta, and I was trafficked at the age of 13 by the music industry, by a very big organized criminal group that involves a lot of people, and I'm gonna talk about it because I use my story that here in Mexico and in Latin America is very well known, but I cannot just resume it in a few minutes because it's quite a story, and it involved me being exploited as labor exploitation, and also I was a sexual slave. From the age of 13 to the age of 17 under the false idea of a music academy that was involved with one of the main TV companies and some of the main music companies in America. So it was a very well organized and good looking scheme, and it affected at least 40 denounces, 40 legal complaints have been placed in Mexico since 1986 till 2000 probably. So I was born in 1982, and 4 years after I was born, the first legal complaint was already set in the Mexican authorities against these people. So imagine pretty much my entire life, I've been related to criminals and things like that. So it's a very awkward situation. And even though my story is very well known here in Mexico and in many other places, I want to tell you what's important about it, because this is a public story that I can use because I had no rights, I have no privacy, I had no support, and maybe many other, I'm sure most of the other survivors in the world are gonna face the same challenges that I had faced all my life. Plus the fact that maybe only 2% of the people that has been trafficked survive. So imagine the numbers are not on our favor. I was re-victimized through the media, through the legal system, through the society, and that also affected my own healing and my own progress towards becoming what I would call a normal citizen. I'm not a normal citizen, not because of me, it's because the system didn't help me to feel normal. The abuse broke me, and the moment I understood what human trafficking is and modern slavery, that was not before my 30s, I understood what happened to me. But just to give you some context, here in Mexico, there was no law against human trafficking before 2012. I was saved by the Interpol in the year 2000. So 12 years after, just a law started to show up in my country. So I'm not a lawmaker or an attorney, so I didn't understand it until probably 7 years after the law came out. Trafficking is not always organized crime, or is not always something that looks so out of our environment. They are organized, but a trafficker could be your neighbor, could be your doctor, could be the school teacher. And that's why I want to talk about like the average citizen, the random citizen, and how can we really identify the trafficking, because we don't know, as Mr. Matt said previously, how can you prevent a crime that you don't know about? Trafficking, the traffickers are very creative. They adapt, they evolve, they create alliances. They have their own inner circles of like criminal-like mentalities, and they protect each other. So we're facing like I don't know, it's a very protective environment. And we have to be like the other part. We have to be allied to fight this situation, and to open the eyes and open the mouth if we see something weird. We should not fear making a mistake, because many times when people say we have to make a denounce if we see something strange, or we hear something strange in the neighborhood or whatever, we're afraid of minding something that is not our business. But it's better to be too cautious than to lose a life, because that life that we may not save is almost impossible to get back. The disappeared people, the trafficked people, are very unlikely to go back home. So we have to take the risk. And even if we make a denounce, say, I think these all symptoms look like, just investigate. That's not your job, or not my job, to make an investigation. That's the authorities. But in the meantime, it is our job to make the right move at the right time. if somebody did that move when I was being trafficked through Mexico, USA, Spain, Argentina, and Brazil, I went through airport security spots at 13 years old, 14 years old, 15 years old with people that didn't look like my family at all, that didn't have my last name, and I was looking, but if only one person did a move, maybe I was gonna be saved many years earlier, but probably that was not my destiny. My destiny is to survive and talk to you about it. But it was a very high price to pay, trust me. Nobody wanna go through that. Now, why we have to fight traffickers? Because on top of that, on top of the human factor, they're also involved normally in many other crimes. Actually, trafficking is the sum of many crimes, at least sexual, physical, psychological violence, forced labor, deprivation of freedom, food, health, education, identity, forced or induced drug addiction, or forced and induced pregnancy and abortion, institutional abuse and corruption. So it's a cancer. It's a very bad disease in our society, and it's almost impossible that the traffickers are very nice and they exploit you, but they feed you well, or they treat you nicely and they give you supportive words. They destroy you in every way, shape, or form, because that's how they will be able to continue exploiting you, right? If you're strong and if you have a good health and a good mental attitude, you're gonna be more likely to run away. Basically, I know I don't have so much time, but I wanna say that what we have to do is to learn. And using the word have, I know it's strong. You don't have to do anything, but I think we're morally obligated to understand what is human trafficking. Again, I have a book in English and a book in Spanish. It's available on Amazon. We use technology to get to other countries, to get to other places. We can use the technology to be many more steps ahead than we are right now. But we have to know how it works. We have to know how it affects us, and it is affecting every one of us, even if we don't see it. So we should stop looking at modern slavery as something like far from us or far from our reality. It can be anywhere, and it is anywhere, actually. As if you don't believe me, we just saw the numbers. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Karola de la Cuesta. We are so grateful to have the opportunity to listen to your story and also all your insights, and for articulating so clearly the complexity of the relationship between the perpetrators and the victims and then survivors. And we're really, really grateful for having your intervention and to be able to go so deeply in one particular case study, and to remember that every time we're looking at the data point, we're looking at the human. So we want to have the big overview, but let's remember that we are talking about people's stories. So thank you for bringing us this perspective. And as you said, while this might seem so far-fetched from our life, in fact, this affects all of us through indirectly through maybe some of the products or the services we are consuming, or through some of the interactions we have. So I think this is a really great way to invite Charlotte from Walk Free to tell us a bit more about the very ambitious task that they've been taking on for so many years on trying to measure the scale of modern slavery, to try not only to get the statistics, but also to create these connections between the source of the products and the countries where those products are ending up, and then most likely from there ending up on our plate or the clothes on our backs. So Charlotte, to you. Thank you.
Hi. Sorry, I hope everybody can hear me and see the slides, let me know if you can't. Karola, just thank you so much for your remarks and just for your willingness to share. I think yeah, it's just so awful and evil and unfortunately incredibly persistent, as you mentioned, for one person to take advantage of another person for their own profit. And it's unimaginable that it happens. And yeah, one of the reasons why Walk Free exists is to help try and accelerate an end of all forms of modern slavery in any way that we can. So yeah, so one of the main reasons that we're known, as Adriana mentioned, is for the Global Slavery Index. I guess just a little bit of background on that is our founders believed that kind of in order to address the problem of modern slavery, then you have to be able to measure it first to see kind of what we're working with as a starting place. So we produce the Global Slavery Index, which is the world's most comprehensive data set on modern slavery. We also do release the global estimates of modern slavery, and that's in collaboration with the International Labour Organization. And just to say from the outset, I'm not part of the research team. So if it ever sounds like I'm being super proud of what's been done, it's because I am, and I've had no part to do with it. But our Global Slavery Index, it's released every 4 years. So the last version was in 2023. Next version is coming up in 2027. So the surveys and the research is going on now that informs that. It's a national breakdown of the extent of modern slavery in 160 countries. So we can't do all the countries because some of the survey methods we use aren't transferable, or the statistical modeling doesn't work for every single country, but it is 160 countries. And to give you an idea of the scale of the research, we draw on the largest survey of its kind ever conducted. So the surveys cover 75 different countries. And those surveys involved a mix of face-to-face and telephone interviews with almost 110,000 respondents. We also conduct analysis of government responses, and that draws close to 25,000 data points sourced from 176 countries. And so this involves conducting an extensive review of country laws and policies. We also conduct the world's largest literature review on modern slavery, and we interview survivors and also NGOs with expertise on specific countries to get that more qualitative data as well. So the GSI was essentially designed to answer 3 questions. What is the extent of modern slavery? What makes people vulnerable? And what are governments doing to respond? We also do take a look at the G20 countries because they generate a great deal of demand for products that might be made with modern slavery. So we look at supply chains and examine kind of like high-risk goods and high-risk sectors as well. So as Matt had mentioned earlier, we estimate that there's 50 million people living in modern slavery around the world. Of these people, approximately 28 million are in forced labor and 22 million are in forced marriages. And this actually represents a 10 million person increase since our previous GSI was released in 2021. So the most vulnerable people there are women, children, and migrants. So more than 12 million of all people in modern slavery are unfortunately children, with women and girls accounting for over half of them, 54% there. Migrant workers as well, when we look at forced labor, migrant workers are 3 times more likely to be forced into working than non-migrant workers. Oftentimes, protections offered to citizens don't extend to migrants in many countries, and they can also be deceived into work, which they're not paid for. So this is just that kind of world map. Modern slavery takes place all over the world, as Karola mentioned. The 10 countries with the highest prevalence of modern slavery, that is people in slavery per 1,000, is on the left-hand side of the map there. So maybe these kinds of countries might not surprise you too much, with North Korea being the highest. And then in terms of the actual number of people who are in modern slavery, that list is on the right-hand side, the 2 biggest world populations being at the top as well, which makes sense. So those countries that have the highest prevalence, they do share some political, social, and economic characteristics. Many are in volatile regions and have experienced conflict and political instability. Several of those on this list have authoritarian governments or state governments that perpetrate state-imposed forced labor. And then these countries, so in the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Kuwait, that are part of the top 10 in terms of prevalence, they host millions of migrant workers who are extremely vulnerable to exploitation, and particularly within those contexts. The largest number of people in modern slavery are found in those 10 countries on the right, as well, as I've mentioned. We also assess government response. So we take a look at what are governments doing like to protect people who could be vulnerable to modern slavery. Karola mentioned about going through airports and people not identifying that, you know, she was traveling with people who didn't look like her, who didn't share a surname with her. So when we look at government response, we do assess things like, are frontline workers being trained on what to look for in terms of detecting somebody who might be in slavery? Unfortunately, many countries might deport a migrant worker because they've been in breach of their visa, when in actual fact, that person is not allowed to leave. They haven't been able to leave their workplace, right? So if you don't have your responders and your police force, hospital workers trained on what modern slavery or forced labor, forced marriage looks like, then they can't respond in the way that they should. So we assess a number of different things across government response, including the legal framework that is in place, and if they require companies to report on what they're doing to protect people in their supply chains and in their operations. And that's kind of what this map shows. So you can see here on the left-hand side, countries that have taken the most action to address modern slavery, and the least action is on the right-hand side there. Generally we've seen a lot of stagnation on these scores, which is interesting. So the past couple of editions, there hasn't been a huge amount of movement. And then, I think just noting on the left-hand side, these countries are characterized by conflict or active involvement, in corruption, complicity, and state-imposed forced labor as well. A regional overview. You can see in this bar chart that the Arab states have the highest prevalence of modern slavery, followed by Europe and Central Asia, then Asia and the Pacific, and then Africa and the Americas. And the countries with the highest prevalence in those regions are stated there on the right. I think this probably not them. These countries might not be the biggest surprise to you, in terms of, like, if you think about how vulnerable people who are in those countries are to modern slavery. There's a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, dictatorial regimes in place where people, they can't go anywhere for help, even if they were in incredible trouble. I put this in because I know that most people on this call love data. All these dots represent countries, but each of the lines represent a region. So in terms of vulnerability to modern slavery, so factors that make a person vulnerable might include like poverty, obviously, is a huge driver of modern slavery. And we measure that by things like, do they have access to a mobile phone? Do they have access to police? Are the police corrupt? Will they actually help them? Do they have access to clean water? Like, how desperate is that person for work? How desperate is that person to accept any type of employment that they can possibly find? How vulnerable is that person essentially to being taken advantage of? So the highest vulnerability score there is in Africa, followed by Arab states, followed by Asia and the Pacific there, then the Americas, and Europe and Central Asia being the lowest overall. And government response, again, as we've seen, the highest government response, the strongest government response being in Europe and Central Asia. So this is just a super brief overview. I know you're probably trying to drink from a fire hydrant at this stage. If you want to do some more research, please do take a look at our global data portal. It's very interactive, and you can really get stuck in there. Just a final kind of point from me. I've been sharing about how we measure modern slavery happening all over the world and where it happens the most intensely. But in our global economy, we're all connected to this exploitation that goes on, especially in the form of forced labor. So high-risk products are imported by every single country, and our research looks at some of the products imported by G20 countries, including electronics, garments, palm oil, solar panels are very high risk, and textiles, among other goods. And this is really just a small sample of all the goods that are imported. So even when the number of people in modern slavery seems low in a certain country, like in Australia, we estimate is 41,000 people in modern slavery within Australia, often a company here is just one supplier away from some serious labor exploitation that is taking place, if not full-blown modern slavery. And that's why companies have a really important role to play in requiring strong labor practices of their suppliers. And I say requiring, I don't just mean that they can say, oh, I'm over here purchasing from you, therefore you have to have all these things in place and place all the onus on a supplier. They have to partner with them, be expressing their expectations and helping them to upskill, holding them to account, and really prioritizing this respect for human rights and embedding it within their practices. So some, I think Karola mentioned that there are serious criminal networks who are very organized, working to exploit people. There are also forms of modern slavery that take place that are seen to be more like negligent and manipulative, but in different settings. So there's not always a huge level of understanding. So I wanted to. Oh, sorry, someone must be having a conversation over there. But yeah, I just think companies can take serious steps to help others improve their practices. And I wanted to share one example to help you understand what I mean. There's a company that's based in Perth, a mining company here, and they were sharing with us about a supplier that they have in Lesotho who produce uniforms for their South African mine site. They conducted an audit of this one supplier, and it revealed that they had really terrible labor practices across the board. But they, interestingly, they responded really positively. They were really happy for the opportunity to like upskill and put better measures in place to improve their like payment systems, to improve their administration and hiring practices, and to ensure that their workers were treated better and paid well for like all the hours they were working. So you sometimes can come into contact with people who they just have really poor practices, which has an impact on the most vulnerable people, which is the workers. So that's why businesses have such a crucial role to play. And this mining company shared that helped them to not only maintain that one contract with the mining company, but it also helped that supplier to attract new businesses as well, because they were operating in a way that promoted the welfare of workers, which was appealing to those responsible businesses. Anyway, we'll be discussing that aspect of it in a lot more detail in this afternoon session in terms of like business responsibility and what they can and should do. So I'll just go ahead and leave it there, but hopefully that's helped you kind of understand a bit more of the global context. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. And certainly this, I think, really sets the scene of the global context, as you mentioned, and the complexity of modern slavery. And once again, making that link that while maybe we think we live in countries where slavery doesn't happen, or we assume that it's just happening over there through the products and services that we are consuming, we are still at risk of being connected with this crime. And that's why it's so important to do this work on creating that transparency in supply chain and assessing the statements, which is what we're going to do in this hackathon. But thank you for providing that perspective and staying also around the issue of data. I would like to invite Doug to tell us a little bit more about his experience in the law enforcement. Also, if there are any particular cases that you think will be interesting for the participants to learn, but also to tell us more about the challenges in the way the law enforcement are using the data in trying to tackle this crime. So Doug, to you, we're really excited to learn from your extremely vast experience in this field. So we're here to listen. Thank you. No problem. We can wait. Also, I want to invite all the participants. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions in the chat. This session is going to run for almost 2 hours, so we'll have lots of time for question and answering. And if you're not asking questions, I have a long list, so please make sure you ask your questions. And again, because these sessions are closed only for the hackathon participants, you have a unique opportunity to interact with the speakers directly, while the rest will just have the opportunity to listen to the session afterwards. So thank you so much for your questions. And I see, Doug, your slides are on, so I'll pass it back to you.
All right, great. So in talking a little bit about law enforcement, and the issue of data, this is something that I could talk about for a really long time. I actually, growing up, I was horrible at math in school, but I found that statistics made sense to me, and so I've always enjoyed, both qualitative, especially qualitative, but also quantitative research, and I do a lot of work in this area of data analysis, but also trying to work with data analysts and researchers and how to make their research more relevant to law enforcement in general. One of the biggest failures in law enforcement, though, is knowing what we don't know and not doing anything about it. So that has traditionally been a big issue with law enforcement in general, especially here in the United States. Because oftentimes, if law enforcement knows about an issue, they are going to be forced to address that issue. So or if they acknowledge an issue, if they acknowledge data, they're going to have to do something about it if that is a crime problem that law enforcement is sworn to tackle, right? If it's an issue if it's a public safety issue, they're going to have to address that issue. And that can be a problem sometimes because law enforcement agencies are traditionally, they've been under-resourced, they have lower manpower, budgets are stretched thin, and they don't always have the ability or the capability to address problems the way that they need to be addressed. And for some, they would rather not do anything than do something the wrong way. And then, as it pertains to human trafficking, the amount of human trafficking research data today is overwhelming. From 2000 to 2017, there were over 2,000 scholarly research articles published. The U.S. is currently leading the human trafficking research trend, and the publication of human trafficking research, even since 2017, is continuing the trend upward. So there's all of this data, there's all of this research that's out there. But the problem is, because there's so much out there, a lot of it hasn't been properly focused. So there's still a great deal of attention placed on prevalence data. Everybody wants to know how big human trafficking is and how many victims there are. Many organizations believe that they need these money to raise funds, to raise budgets. And I'm not saying that prevalence data is bad, but it has its limitations, right? Because and thank goodness for everybody that's on here that's doing research, and I love the Global Slavery Index and the work that they do. I think that is such an amazing, powerful tool. But we're never we're never going to be able to get to the point where we can say that there are X number of human trafficking victims globally or X number of human trafficking victims in the United States. We can't do that. All we can do is report on the data that we have. And because human trafficking is a hidden crime, it's a crime that often takes place in the shadows. It's because it's misunderstood, because many victims never disclose. We're never going to be able to actually quantify the exact number. But there are still a lot of people, a lot of researchers out there that are looking for that number. And I don't know that that is necessarily the best place. Should we be focused more on causative data? What are the push-pull factors behind human trafficking? Is it lack of clean water? Is it environmental issues? Is it competition over natural resources? Is it conflict over religion? Especially on the labor trafficking side, but all of those things globally create these push-pull factors. They create the vulnerabilities, and maybe that's what we need to be working on. And I think we're finally getting to the point too where we're starting to see more survivor-focused research being done. Again, where research is survivor informed, where instead of, because honestly, at the end of the day, the only real experts in the field of human trafficking are those who have been trafficked or the traffickers themselves. And because unless you are a survivor, it's very hard to put yourself in the place of a victim. And so the efforts that are currently being taken place, I think, to engage survivors more in research is a powerful trend that really needs to be continued. We're still lacking, though, in certain kinds of data, especially data on the intersection of human trafficking and healthcare. There are statistics out there that indicate that 80% or 80 to 85% of trafficking victims have been inside of a healthcare environment. They've seen a healthcare provider in the last year, right? So are we doing enough to identify human trafficking, within a healthcare environment? What about data identifying trends, patterns, methods, and tactics? Again, instead of focusing on prevalence, instead of focusing on trying to quantify a number, let's try and quantify or qualify some of these other issues that are impacting not only the prevalence of human trafficking, but the ability of law enforcement and NGOs to respond to it effectively. And then, finally, research on financial data as it pertains to human trafficking. At the end of the day, human trafficking, although it involves human victims, it is a financially motivated crime. It is a crime that if there was no financial motivation to it, it probably would not exist. So how can we do a better job of really attacking what I call the head of the snake? And that's the money. That's the financial side of human trafficking. But let's face the facts. Most law enforcement professionals are not academic research, and they do not understand research methodology. That's just the facts. Most law enforcement officers, especially in the United States, they don't have advanced, college degrees. Some departments require a bachelor's degree, a 4-year college degree. Some only require 2 years. Some agencies don't require a degree at all. And so there's kind of a big delta there in the understanding of what real academic research is and what data is at the end of the day. And that's those education levels are largely reflective from the lower level all the way to the top. A lot of, police chiefs, a lot of law enforcement executives don't have, advanced degrees either. And so it creates a lot of confusion as to what data is. Webster's dictionary defines data as factual information, right? Measurements or statistics used as a basis for reasoning, discussion, or calculation. Well, that doesn't really do a law enforcement officer a whole lot of good. if we're truly talking about the core definition of data, this isn't really what we're looking for. We get a little bit closer when we start talking about information, but there's a difference between data and information, right? Information is organized or structured data that's processed in a way, according to Jennifer Rowley, it's processed in such a way that the information now has relevance for a specific purpose or context. It makes it meaningful, valuable, useful, and relevant, right? So that's we're getting much closer to what law enforcement needs. But at the end of the day, when we think of data, law enforcement wants intelligence. And intelligence is the product resulting from the collecting, evaluation, collation, interpretation, analysis of all available data and information concerning intentions, capabilities, and objectives of an adversary or a criminal organization. The way to do that, we're going to talk about in just a minute. How do we move from data to information to intelligence, which is really what law enforcement wants. When we're strictly talking about data, however, there's a lot of cultural resistance because it's law enforcement officers, despite technology, despite everything else, they're one of the hardest groups of people to get to change their way of doing things. And that cultural resistance, it hinders the adoption of innovative practices. And ultimately, it hinders our overall effectiveness. I mean, the picture up on top of a police officer using a police call box, to call in to the police station. That was a very frequent and a very common tactic back in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. That's the way law enforcement often communicated because we didn't have two-way radios at the time. The old teletype machines down below that was groundbreaking technology at the time, but today we would consider it antiquated. Even the fax machine has put the teletype out of business. Law enforcement tends to want to stay with traditional methods. But again, those traditional methods, they create barriers to change, and they create barriers to implementing research-based design. Law enforcement tends to have concerns about data. Is the data accurate? Law enforcement, we're generally skeptics, right? We tend to look at things from a different perspective. We tend to look for the problems in situations or in information. That's just what we do, or we're just generally very skeptical. And if we are talking about data, then law enforcement's going to want to know, is what you're talking about applicable to the context that we're facing? Is this information actually relevant to what we do, and is it going to be able to impact or affect decision making? And that's the other big issue, right? Without data accuracy and applicability, we don't have data that we can use to make informed decisions that can influence change within law enforcement. There was a show on, and I think probably Matt Friedman and I are the only two people that are probably on this call that are old enough to remember this show. I'm not calling you out, Matt. It's just the facts, right? We're just that experienced. But there was a show on in the United States back in the late 60s and early 70s called Dragnet. And there was a very famous line in that show. Sergeant Joe Friday of the Los Angeles Police Department, when people would begin to give him a bunch of information, he would just say, "Just the facts, ma'am. Just the facts." And that's, at the end of the day, that's really what law enforcement's looking for. And if you want to learn to work effectively and provide data that law enforcement can use to drive change, then learn to tell stories with your data. There is something, and it's a very difficult thing for a lot of data analysts and a lot of scientists and researchers to do, but there is an art to taking data, to taking information and being able to tell a story with that data that makes it relevant and applicable to the job that law enforcement has to do. And that's true in any crime set, but it's especially true in the field of human trafficking. Again, when we talk about reluctance to utilize data, from law enforcement, it's because that there is a lack of understanding. Sometimes research motivations are unclear or they're suspect, right? They're not really sure what the researcher is looking for when they come and say that we want to do research on this issue. And again, as I mentioned early on, if we know about the problem, then we have to deal with it, and that means money in terms of law enforcement. And then oftentimes law enforcement, they're afraid that data could make them look bad, right? If data shows that they're not doing something that they should be doing it or doing it in a way that is most efficient, it could make leadership look bad. So keep those things in mind when you're doing research related to crime sets and to problems in which maybe you want to engage law enforcement. Know going into it that these are some of the questions, these are some of the issues that they're going to be wrestling with. And then what data are we collecting? And how and why are we collecting that data? I would say for those of you that are out there that are doing research, that are interested in doing human trafficking related research, or any research at all, really, when it comes to law enforcement, focus on doing research for a purpose. Research focused on relevant issues, finding realistic solutions, focused on ensuring favorable outcomes, right? Because there's plenty of data out there already that tells us that we have a problem and we need to do more. And a lot of the data that's out there today, and a lot of human trafficking out there today, focuses solely on the fact that of telling us that we have a problem. We know that we have a problem. We know that we need to do more. Help us get there. Law enforcement wants data ultimately that's going to help them to do their job and do it more efficiently. That means putting bad guys in jail, and that means recovering victims, identifying and recovering victims. The LE needs for data vary, but the application is inarguably different than researchers. Law enforcement, number one, they want data that's going to help them ensure public safety, that's going to help inspire public confidence, that's going to show an articulable and efficient return on the investment that they're going to have to make by responding to the outcomes of that data. They want data that's going to be able to inform decision making. So we're talking about trends, patterns, and methods. And they want data that tells a story and informs operational decision making for leadership. What they want is intelligence. So learn to tell a story. It's a capital mistake, according to Sherlock Holmes, right? It's a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. And I think that's a very powerful statement when we're talking about human trafficking, because it's very easy to get get focused on a solution, or because this is such an intense personal issue for many people, it also opens the door to research bias, which then again leads to the question, is the data accurate? What's the motivation behind the researcher? Perhaps the biggest takeaway for researchers, be humble and helpful. If you're trying to do research to provide data to be, for law enforcement, remember that raw data is no substitute for experience. Be humble, be helpful in working with law enforcement partners. Learn how to tell stories with your data. Humanize it. Focus people's attention on the key insights that promote change or action. And again, this is where survivor-informed data is key. Someone once said, and I think Ben Hoyle, I think, who's the chief change strategist at Google, said that data drives decisions, but stories change hearts, right? So we have to get to that point where we're able to take our data and reframe it into a way that it's going to move people. We've got to be able to tell stories with it. We have to be able to humanize with it. And remember, data that's loved is data that survives. At the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to get to. And I think that that's probably what you're wanting to get to as well. But remember these things when you're working with law enforcement. Again, law enforcement's view of data is going to be very different from your data. Again, what they're looking for is intelligence, not necessarily raw data. They're not necessarily interested in if in your dissertation, they may not necessarily be interested in your chapter 2 or their chapter 3, or even the chapter 4. They're really going to be looking, they really want to find what the data ultimately tells them and how it can be used at the end of the day.
Thank you so much, Doug. This has been such a insightful presentation, and we really appreciate the data angle that you brought. And I think this is a very, very practical presentation, not only for this hackathon, but beyond. And I think the participants and all of us will take from this this important message on how do you translate research or projects into practice, and the power of the storytelling. And here we have this opportunity, as you mentioned, to take data, to transform it in information and then intelligence, and most importantly, build trust. So in this hackathon, as you learn also through the challenges, we want to see you doing just this. So for instance, as we mentioned, we don't want your solution to be the most extensive, to analyze all the modern slavery statements that exist on the internet, but rather to show us, the judges, that your solution can be trusted, and that you have put the thought on it, and you can just show us a small sample, and that will be sufficient, because we need these tools and these products that you're building to be then ultimately used in practice. So thank you so much for running through this entire process and also sharing so much of your experience. And I would like now to invite Natalie from Red Cross to talk a little bit more about the quantitative data and the importance of this in fighting modern slavery. Natalie, to you.
Thank you. I'm just sharing screen and just want to make sure that that is working for everybody, and that you are seeing it in presentation mode. Is that right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I can see all of you as well. Thank you. Thank you. Look, first, I want to say thank you all for your participation in this hackathon and the opportunity to speak to you today. As you've heard, slavery is one of the greatest humanitarian issues of our time. And we know that organisations, and I'm not sure if you've covered it yet, but we know that they're required to report. And I know from working with them that some of them are doing a lot to report on their actions to address modern slavery. But we also know, at least in Australia, that there's little evidence that the work organisations is doing is having an impact on the people in situations of slavery or at risk of slavery. So what I'd like to do today, and I know we're behind time, so I'll try and speed up a bit, is tell you a little bit about the work that Australian Red Cross does in relation to modern slavery, and provide some information about the people we've supported since we've been running the support program. And then I'd like to talk about some qualitative information about what survivors have told us is important in addressing modern slavery. So you can consider that in the context of statement assessments and data, and how we make sort of modern slavery statements a tool for positive social change. So Australian Red Cross is committed to working with the Australian government to promote a whole of community approach to addressing modern slavery. And we do this in a number of ways. First, through awareness and understanding across the community from a humanitarian perspective. We do education programs, engagement programs. We engage with a whole range of stakeholders to try and increase awareness and understanding of modern slavery. And the reason we do this is one of the reasons that was talked about earlier. We know that sometimes survivors have told us that if only one person had an understanding of modern slavery and done something to act, they may have got help much earlier. The other thing that we do, and I'll talk a little bit about this today, is we deliver the Support for Trafficking People program on behalf of the Australian government. So we support anybody that has experienced modern slavery in Australia and been referred to us through Australian Federal Police or now through the additional referral pathway. We also do a number of other programs that are designed to assist people in situations of vulnerability that may expose them to modern slavery. So we try in that way to address the sort of underlying factors that allows or enable slavery to happen. We also connect with communities and business to help them to identify and respond to modern slavery risk. And in doing that, we prioritise the well-being, dignity and recovery of people impacted. One of the other programs that we run is the Work Right Hub, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute because there's opportunity for data around that, which helps us better understand the risks that people are experiencing. And finally, what we do is we aim to influence policy responses to modern slavery, really drawing on our expertise in working with survivors to bring forward the humanitarian impacts of modern slavery. So as I said, one of the things we do is the Work Right Hub. Now, the Work Right Hub was developed with support from the Australian government, and the Work Right Hub aims to provide migrant workers with information about work rights and where they can access support. The Work Right Hub has in it decision trees. So when somebody comes into the Work Right Hub, either as a frontline responder or as a worker, they can work through a series of questions which helps identify if they might be in a situation of modern slavery or another form of exploitation. And it then connects them with appropriate support. Using that information at the back end, at a thematic level, we can start to understand themes of risk. So, for instance, by looking at the back end of that information, we can understand that, say, Nepalese workers in a particular region may be experiencing issues around underpayment and overwork hours, or Chinese workers in another region might be experiencing situations where they're having their passports confiscated and that sort of thing. So that provides us with some information there. As I said, the other program that we run is the Support for Trafficking People program, which we've been running on behalf of the Australian government since 2009. During that time, we've supported over 870 people who have experienced modern slavery in Australia. But we know this is only the tip of the iceberg because, as I said earlier, to be referred to our program up until about a year ago, you had to engage with Australian Federal Police. And obviously that's a major barrier for people coming forward. 12 months ago, or just over 12 months ago, an additional referral pathway was introduced, and you can now be referred to our support program by engaging through another not-for-profit who will do an assessment. And we're only starting to see the impacts of that come through now. Here's some data that help you understand the issue of modern slavery in Australia. So, as I said, we've supported a total of 874 people through the program, but that's from 925 referrals. So some people can be referred to the program twice. As you can see, while we've been running the program, the number of referrals has grown significantly. And, you know, why has that happened? That's something that should really be unpacked. But awareness of modern slavery, understanding of the support program, constant promotion of the support program is one of the factors that probably drives that. This table shows the nationality of people referred to the program since we've been running it. And as you can see, people born in Australia make up the largest part of referrals. It's followed by India, Pakistan, Malaysia, Thailand, and Fiji. But in terms of using this data to identify risk, I think it's indicative because, as I said earlier, you know, we know the people being referred to our program are only the tip of the iceberg. Here you can see the referrals by the type of exploitation people have received. Now, in Australia, modern slavery is an umbrella term and it's defined to include forced marriage. So you can see the largest reason for referrals is forced marriage, followed by forced labour and sexual servitude. Exit trafficking is one that people often don't think about, where people are, and is something that we're working with the government on at the moment to raise awareness of, but where people may be trafficked in leaving Australia. So they're tricked into leaving Australia, and then they find that once they've left Australia that they can't return to Australia. So what I'd like to talk about now is what survivors have said around what we can do to address modern slavery. So there was a review of the Modern Slavery Act in Australia a couple of years ago, and as an input to that review, we did some research and interviews with people who had experienced modern slavery in Australia and asked them what was important, what could companies do to address modern slavery? And we came up with a number of things that were consistently coming through. The first is, and this has been talked about earlier today as well, is modern slavery is an unfamiliar term. Many people said that the first time they heard the term modern slavery was when they were referred to the Red Cross support program. Now, this doesn't seem like a big issue, but the nature of the crime of modern slavery means that self-identification can actually be important to being able to get help. So what we've learnt from that is we need to increase awareness of the understanding of modern slavery. And what does that mean for business? And if we're looking at modern slavery statements to understand their effectiveness, I would say, what are organisations doing to raise awareness of modern slavery as an issue in their operations, supply chain and value chain? The next thing that survivors told us is that exploitation often happens in small companies. Small businesses don't have the scrutiny that larger businesses have, allowing them, and it allows them to hide because they might not be subject to the same governance processes. As survivors say, when you're small, not everybody pays attention to you, not everybody looks at you. They also mention, and this has been touched on today too, that modern slavery can happen in the context of communities. So it can often happen in a small family business or in community relationships that provide this environment where exploitation can occur and it can be hidden. From a reporting perspective, in Australia, organisations with an annual consolidated revenue of over $100 million are required to report on their actions to address modern slavery, but small businesses aren't. So if we're looking at statements and we're looking at data and we're pulling out information, what are organisations doing to engage with small businesses? And not just to require more of them, but to support them do the right thing is the thing that I would look for. Crucially, survivors told us that we can't address modern slavery without empowering survivors to speak up. We need to create an environment where workers understand their rights and feel safe to speak up. Survivors told us they might be afraid to speak up for a range of reasons, including they're worried about their visas, they don't have the opportunity to speak up, they're worried that they'll lose their job or harm will come to their family. So when I'm looking at modern slavery statements and I'm looking at other information, I'm thinking, what are we doing? What are organisations doing to create an environment where people feel that they can speak up? Survivors were really clear on what we needed to do to create a situation where they would be empowered. They said the first thing is workers need to understand work rights. Now, that seems simple, but it actually can be a little bit more complex than that. I might understand that I'm meant to be paid X, but I might not understand how many hours I'm required to work or what breaks I'm allowed to get or what overtime is acceptable. And what happens when we see situations of exploitation is it creeps up where the forms of control constantly build until that person feels they can't leave the situation. So workers need to have a real understanding of work rights, and that's why we developed the Work Right Hub. The second thing is workers need safe and accessible channels to access support so that they can overcome barriers to speaking up. And it's not just access to support, but to report any concerns. Now, what does that mean in terms of safe and accessible? Like if you're in a situation of exploitation where you're being controlled, you might not, and we've had situations where people do not have access to phones. They do not have access to any ways to communicate. We've had cases where people have managed to get to a local service station and asked to use the phone, only to find that person who runs a service station reported it back to the employer that they were working for. So it's really important that people have access to report concerns and that they feel that they can trust those concerns. The other thing that work has told us is, and this comes into how we assess modern slavery statements, is we need to monitor what companies are doing. And this isn't just through audits and things like that, because we've seen numerous situations and we've heard of them where people, we know the auditor's coming on Friday, so everybody's going to behave in a particular way. There needs to be an ongoing monitoring so we can see what's happening on a day-to-day basis. And the final thing that work has said is that we need to ensure that any response processes are safe and effective. We know that workers have communities around them, and when they have access to safe and effective response processes, that message gets out there and they will use those channels. But equally, we know that workers know when response processes aren't effective or they aren't safe and they won't use them. I wanted to leave you with one final comment of what survivors have told us. And it was that they want people to understand that modern slavery happens even in countries like Australia, and that if you think someone is being exploited, don't ignore it, speak up, because your actions can make a difference. And I think that we can draw that comment through into looking at the data and the information to say, what data and information can we assess that will support that? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you for bringing this in-depth perspective of what survivors informed your research and how we can take on their advice into designing better research projects, but also better solutions that are really responding to their needs. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to have a more in-depth perspective on the qualitative data that is equally as important in addressing modern slavery. And now I would like to invite Briony from the International Justice Mission to tell us a little bit more about their work in countering modern slavery, but also how do they use data for advocacy. Briony, to you.
Thanks very much, Adriana, and thank you also to Natalie. I'll share my slides now, and please let me know if you can't see them.
Perfect.
Fantastic. I'm also dialing in from Australia, from International Justice Mission, and we're sort of taking a look at a slightly different angle where IJM, we're a global organisation. We protect people in poverty from violence, and we are working overseas. So we're partnering actually with local authorities and 33 offices in 19 different countries to combat slavery, but also violence against women and children and police abuse of power against people living in poverty. Not sure if this is full screen, but I'll see if I can get it to
It's
do
not
that.
now. Yeah, this is perfect now. Thank you.
Okay. If I do that, I can't see my notes, so bear with me, but I'm going to have to do it this way. I apologize. I'll make them slightly larger. So in terms of where we're working, we're specifically working to counter modern slavery in Ghana, West Africa, in Europe, in Romania and Bulgaria, in Asia, in India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And our work includes countering forced labor slavery, human trafficking. And so how do we do that? Our MO is that we strengthen local justice systems by rescuing victims, bringing criminals to justice, restoring survivors to safety and strength, and helping local law enforcement build a safe future that lasts. And this is our proven theory of change. It's that strengthening justice systems to enforce the law deters criminals and protects people from violence. In the 9 jurisdictions where we've completed our program work, we've seen a reduction in the rate of violence by between 50 and 85%. And these completed programs have already protected over 12 million people from slavery and violence. Which brings me to, how does IJM measure protection? So every IJM justice system strengthening project's purpose is to bring about protection. So what does that mean? Well, we define protection as the array of benefits that accrue to people in poverty through a strengthened justice system. And each project implements this protection model. We measure 4 domains to show progress toward the achievement of protection. The prevalence of the crime is reducing. The performance of the justice system is increasing. We want to see key stakeholders' confidence in the performance of the justice system increasing, and vulnerable people's reliance on the justice system increasing as well. And protection measurement helps us, equips us with objective insights. So with high quality protection data throughout project life cycles, we can design these projects to respond to the biggest needs. We can manage them more effectively, and we can confidently report on progress and achievements. Protection measurement is how we hold ourselves accountable, and it demonstrates that our justice system strengthening projects are having the desired impact. Each project that we run is accountable to targets in each of those 4 domains of our protection model. And importantly, protection measurement helps us hold ourselves accountable to survivors and their communities. Much of our protection measurement data focuses on communities of those who are affected by violence, and this is one way that the needs of those with lived experience influences IJM programming. And finally, protection measurement enables essential partnerships for solutions. The fact is, we can't and we don't want to do this on our own. Partnerships are critical to the success of these programs. And measurement provides reliable data and insights that all IJM partners can use to dispel myths, support advocacy, underpin communications, and legitimize policy and programs. It meets the needs of our financial supporters who rightly want high quality partners that can back up claims of impact with rigorous data and through independent evaluations. It builds credibility for local and regional and global forums like this and wherever these crucial conversations are taking place. And it enables better collaboration with other data-informed sectors like the healthcare sector. So now I want to give you a practical example of how IJM is implementing and measuring a justice system strengthening project in West Africa to counter child labour and trafficking in the fishing industry. Ghana's Lake Volta is the world's largest man-made lake. Thousands of children work in its massive fishing industry, and many of these children are held in slavery. First-hand accounts from hundreds of children who've survived trafficking and exploitation on the lake report being forced into life-threatening and exhausting work against their will. These children often experience beatings, malnutrition, and sickness, and are at severe risk of drowning. IJM works with partners in the criminal justice system to ensure that law enforcement and prosecutors have the training and support that they need to identify victims, launch rescues, arrest suspects, and bring criminals to justice. Alongside partners, IJM Ghana is providing aftercare support for survivors of child trafficking and exploitation, and they're working with survivor leaders to raise awareness of trafficking and help transform the justice system to bring protection to children. An older estimate by Ghana's Statistical Services suggested that nearly 50,000 children are involved in fishing in Ghana, with the majority of them working around Lake Volta. However, few prevalence estimates of likely trafficked children existed. So in seeking to address this gap, IJM commissioned an independent study by researchers from leading academic institutions to determine the prevalence of child labour and trafficking in the Lake Volta area. And this study estimated the prevalence of this crime in 3 fishing districts around the lake. Targeting children in fishing villages along the coast of Lake Volta, this study used a household-based probability sampling method to reach 1,286 children. An additional 489 household parents or caregivers were also sampled to understand community perceptions of trafficking and child labour in these areas. Among children interviewed, researchers found that about 38% were likely victims of human trafficking, An additional 45% were engaged in likely exploitative child labour, which includes things like excessive hours and harsh conditions. Researchers found that children who identified as likely trafficked victims were more frequently exposed to dangerous working conditions, physical and psychological harm. And whilst all of us here are interested in the power and utility of data, let's not forget that behind each of these prevalence estimates lies someone's life story. Let me share with you the story of Foley. Foley was raised by his grandparents in a loving home in Ghana, several hours from the largest man-made lake in the world. They wanted to send him to school, but simply couldn't afford his school fees. So Foley stayed home. One day, his grandfather was struck by a car and medical expenses quickly began to pile up. It was then that a relative who lived near Lake Volta visited and offered to take Foley in. His grandparents believed he would go from one loving home to another. Foley arrived at his new home on a remote island on Lake Volta with no school or medical facilities. He didn't know it at the time, but he had just become a slave. Very early one morning, Foley was taken by his boatmaster out onto the massive waters of Lake Volta. As they floated in the deep, dark water, he wondered why he was brought on the lake. He soon learned that his boatmaster needed children like Foley to dive into the dark, murky water and untangle nets that would catch on branches below the surface. Foley didn't know how to swim. 18-hour workdays would become routine for Foley. He woke at 2 a.m., spent the day pulling in heavy fishing nets, and fell asleep around 8 p.m. just to start again in a few hours. This was his life, and this is life for thousands of other young boys on Lake Volta. One morning, as he was preparing for another grueling day, some IJM social workers, investigators, and local authorities were searching for children who were working as slaves on the lake. When their boat pulled up next to Foley's canoe, they called to him, asking him questions about his life. The boatmaster answered, but they saw through his lies. The abusive boatmaster was arrested, and Foley was taken from the canoe with the other boys. After years of working on the lake, Foley was finally free. He was reunited with his grandparents and eventually returned to school. Today, he dreams of becoming a famous soccer player. Since 2014, IJM has been working with local partners to strengthen the public justice system in Ghana. Our team is led and staffed by Ghanaian nationals who support local authorities to bring trafficked children to safety, help restore survivors' physical and mental well-being, and stop those responsible for illegally exploiting children. Our team works hand in hand with survivors and survivor-led advocacy groups in Ghana who are demanding an end to child trafficking. And we provide training for partners on incorporating trauma-informed practices within the justice system in response to trafficking. And although the problem of child trafficking and labour in Ghana seems far away to many people in my country, Australians are potentially linked to this exploitative industry through our international supply chains. Australia imports a small amount of fish from Ghana. We import up to 27,000 Australian dollars worth of seafood products, including fish, from Ghana last year, according to Comtrade. And while this is a relatively small import, Walk Free estimates that around 27 billion Australian dollars worth of goods are at risk of being produced by forced labour. They're imported into Australia each year. And you heard this morning from the Australian Government Attorney General's Department about Australia's Modern Slavery Act, which is currently under review. And Natalie from the Red Cross spoke about the important work that they've been doing in relation to supporting businesses to comply with their requirements under the Act. So a brief recap. In 2018, Australia introduced the Modern Slavery Act to address the issue of slavery in supply chains. It was a vital first step, but it hasn't gone far enough. Right now, large companies are required to report on their modern slavery risks, but not to take action to address those risks. That's why IJM is calling on the Australian government to strengthen the Modern Slavery Act by requiring companies to prevent and address exploitation, not just disclose it. So if you live in Australia and would like to take part in our advocacy campaign, please head to our website at ijm.org.au to sign our petition to the Attorney General this week. We've gathered over 1,600 signatures so far, and we'll be lodging our petition with the Attorney General soon. Thanks so much for your attention, and back to you, Adriana.
Thank you so much, Briony, and thank you for finishing up with a call for action. We have about 20 more minutes left, and actually one of our questions from the participants is asking, what steps can individuals take to raise awareness about modern slavery? Or I can extend it to actually be involved in fighting against it. So maybe signing the petition could be a first step, and we can put the link in the chat. But also I'd like to extend this question to the rest of the panelists. What is your advice for everyday individuals? How can they take steps to raise awareness, but also to be more involved in addressing this horrific crime? Anyone would like to take
I'll
this?
start off by just saying that I am an active on LinkedIn. There's a lot of professional people who don't know much about this particular issue. If you see an article, if you see a video, if you see something related to that, you can share it. And it's the same with Facebook and other social media platforms. So one of the biggest issues is a lack of general awareness. So getting the word out and spreading the information is an important part of the process, even though it may seem like it's quite small.
Yeah, and I would add to that, and Matt kind of said what I was going to say. Educate yourself to the facts, not to the sensationalism, not to the hyperbole, but to the facts. Educate others and find opportunities to volunteer. I am certain that all of the organizations from all of the panelists on here probably have opportunities for volunteer work. I know IJM has they offer fellowships. There's all kinds of opportunities there. I'm sure the Australian Red Cross, I'm sure Charlotte, probably opportunities for fellows and internships and that kind of thing. So just find a way to volunteer. You don't have to, because not everybody is cut out to do work at the ground level. Not everybody is cut out to deal with victims or to work on the law enforcement side and the challenges that come with that, both in terms of the safety issues, the long-term resiliency issues, that type of thing. But you can find a lot of different ways to volunteer and add value to this work.
Absolutely, and I hope this
Can I?
hackathon also provides one of those opportunities for you to apply your own unique skills in data and AI. And I think you've already learned a lot through this event, but also you are going to contribute by bringing your innovation and to this. Natalie?
Yeah, sorry, Andrea, can I add to that too? Because I think it's really important, and I think what everyone has said is really important, that you have an understanding of the issue, but also understand what the indicators are, what modern slavery can look like. And there's a lot of information out there through the ILO, through the AFP in Australia, where they talk about what the indicators of modern slavery might be. The other thing I would say is know what support services are available where you can report any concerns. In recent conversations we've had with Australian Border Force and AFP, they've said don't be afraid to report an issue because it might be the piece of information that they're looking for. So be prepared to make a report. And the other thing that we say to people is, often I'll think, oh, I don't want to do that because what if I'm wrong? But I say to people, what if you're right? Like it could be that very piece of information that Australian Federal Police is looking for. So understand where you can go and report.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we have one more question. It's probably more towards you, Charlotte. So in your statistics, you show how much of the products that Australia or even Canada is importing is at risk of being connected to modern slavery. And considering the population of those countries, this seems to be quite disproportionate in a way, according to the question participants. So is this accurate? Would you say that Australia having quite a small population compared to other countries is importing more products at risk of modern slavery than other countries, or what is your perspective on this?
Sorry, I don't know if I completely understand that question. So at first you seem to be disproportionately purchasing the proceeds. I think so. If it's based on our estimate, the estimates for the G20 countries, we assess the types of products that are high risk, and then our list is actually based on the value of those products. So yeah, it basically is a way of breaking down how we can indicate which countries import the highest number of goods. So yeah, I think G20 countries is where we started because they obviously have the largest economies. But every country imports goods. It has trade relationships with every country, So it might not always. Yeah, I guess if you're saying, are we disproportionately funding modern slavery? Sorry if it comes across like that. That's not what I mean by that. Yeah, sorry. I hope that helps clear things up slightly.
Oh, perfect. I think there is also this, we heard the anti-slavery commissioner, and this can become a little bit more technical in terms of legislation, mentioning that in the absence of an import ban, Australia can risk to become a dumping place of modern slavery products. So with a bit of context, there are some legislations a bit more strict than the Modern Slavery Act, not allowing products made with forced labor to enter the US or in the future the European Union. And if Australia is not passing similar law, then it can become the place where where these products would end up going, because we are such a big market, consumer market. So even though we do have quite a small population, we do have a lot of purchasing power. So hopefully that kind of justified. But I see, Tammy, that you have your hands up if you want to maybe extend a little bit on this question.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for your work. It's such a touching thing to experience, all this information at once. Dr. Gwynn, Ms. Gwynn, I'm sorry, I'm not sure. It was referring specifically to a graphic you had with the different countries saying how much each country was purchasing. And just at first view, if we look at the UK and Germany, they were purchasing a little bit more, but they're much larger than both Canada and Australia. So I was just wondering if we had some idea about per capita benefits that in different countries.
No, sorry, this just refers to the amount that we import of those particular products that we looked at, and the product list that we chose was informed by the US Department of Labor's list of goods considered to be at risk of forced labor or child labor. So it was kind of a subset. We also supplemented with some of our research into other products that we considered to be high risk, and then yeah, we calculated how much of each of those imports each country was importing. So that's where those numbers come from.
Thank you.
And we have one more question, a hand up from Juan.
Hello, quick question. I'm still trying to understand if I am a business person, I actually happen to have a company, and if I say I want to hire, for example, talent from another country, how do business founders know that, how can they know that the company they're hiring is involved in modern slavery? I think from what I understand is or so far I don't understand if there is a way to know. You can just hire someone without knowing anything about it.
I think one of the things that you can do is your due diligence on the recruitment company. Contact them, ask them questions, get a general sense of what they know about the issue of modern slavery. Ask if they have any fees associated with the migrant going from one place to another. That would be perceived as an indicator of modern slavery. What type of support do they offer, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a due diligence type of thing. And, oftentimes organizations like yours don't ask those questions, and then they end up getting people but they don't realize that that individual who has arrived there has some kind of exploitation or indebtedness associated with their movement there.
But
I would
sorry, I'm
just
still confused because sorry to interrupt. Because if you, Matt, if you wanna hire me, hire my company, I have developers in Colombia, and if you ask me, hey, are you involved in like, do you have, are you a good guy? Like, do you have all your employees in good conditions? I will say yes. But what if I have 30 people in my kitchen coding for me? Like, this is what I really want to understand. Like,
It's trying to collect whatever information you can from whatever available information is there. You know, you're right. People do lie about their situations, and companies do give false information. And that's part of the reason why we have so much exploitation. It's difficult to identify clandestine activities if those people don't want you to know about those clandestine activities. I'll open it up to others to perhaps add to that.
I would add to it and say, well, first is, are you paying enough for those workers to be getting a living wage? And if you're not, well, that's a problem. My next thing is, and this is where we draw on, what survivors have told us, is what does that company have in place so that survivors can understand their work rights? And what does that company have in place so that survivors can speak up or access support if they're experiencing an issue? Like, unpacking that will help you understand some of the situation. As Matt said, we're dealing with a crime and people will go to great lengths to hide a crime. But there are some steps that you can take to better understand that. Also looking at, has there been any reports about that company? Are there any reports of workers in that region or in that industry experiencing issues? Those are the sorts of things that I look at.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I will also, oh, no, go on.
I was
Can
just
I
gonna
say one
say,
other thing? Also, if you're really concerned, engage with not-for-profits on the ground. So when I was working in Asia, and I'm sure Matt would say the same thing, it's like, I knew which companies were exploiting their workers because they were the ones that were coming in to get support. They were the ones that were sort of visiting the food kitchen that I was involved in working with. They were the ones that were coming to our shelter. Those not-for-profits on the ground know what's happening.
yeah, I was gonna say exactly what you just said. Is that engage with the nonprofits, the NGOs that are doing the work on the ground. There are companies out there, like Slave Check, Evidentity, Dark Watch, others, that are using technology to help identify companies that are engaged in forced labor, labor trafficking, labor exploitation, that kind of thing, both domestically and internationally. But not everybody has access to that technology due to resources and that kind of thing. But I I have no doubt that the NGOs, the nonprofits on the ground that are working with people every day, um, I'm sure they'd be more than willing to share their knowledge.
Thank you. And I will also shamelessly plug in here the next session that we're going to have, which is to actually bring in the business perspective. So Juan, if you're able to join, this is such an important question that you're asking, and I'm really glad that you bring this up because it's a very concrete question. And in the next session, we will have large businesses, universities, they have very complex supply chains, and they're asking the same question. How do we know when we engage with our suppliers that they're doing the right thing? And then we're going to have technology providers helping those companies trying to create that transparency in their supply chain, collect the relevant data and be able to do that due diligence. So make sure you join also the next session. And thank you for asking this question because it's the exact question why we're trying to answer and why we are here in this hackathon looking at the company statements. Is that transparency in the supply chain, that link between the crime, the products that we're consuming and everyday people, and how we can try to create the transparency and try to eliminate eliminate these links and help people live a better life and not be exploited in supply chains. And before we have about 5 more minutes, and I really wanted to ask one more question to Karola, because we heard so much today about the survivor's perspective. And I would like to have an opportunity to ask you once more, Karola, if you can tell us a little bit more about, from your experience, what is missing in the current response to modern slavery, and especially in the context of technology development. How can we build better technology that is informed by survivors' perspective, that really can truly serve the survivors community and be impactful?
Thank you, Adriana. Yeah, from my experience, what is missing in current responses to modern slavery is, in reality, much more humanity, far less corruption, and drastic reduction in the demand for products obtained through the exploitation. It means that we really have to be to care about what we're looking at on our dispositives or our apps or our phones, what products we're using, even if we consider that app harmless, it could be harming. And sometimes we have heard maybe fast fashion and things like that, and we still prefer to save some money, right? So we have to care. That's why it's so important for people to truly understand what modern slavery means. I just shared something that a woman I met last year in an event in the United States. She's from Australia, and she was working in a marketing company, and then she started to realize things. But you don't see there's a problem unless you know, you have information, okay? And then she became an activist, okay? So it's impossible to leave all the responsibility to the authorities or to the technical developer, sorry, or somebody else. The responsibility is ours, because once you realize what slavery is, if you're watching an adult video, there is a high chance that you're witnessing an abuse, an exploitation, and a crime. So if your consciousness is healthy, you will feel sick just to keep doing these kind of activities or buying, I don't know, from very weird locations. So awareness is the key. And that's precisely why survivors' voices must be at the forefront, because obviously hearing directly from survivors confront the reality and the gravity of the issue. We don't look at numbers anymore. We don't look at statistics anymore. We hear in first person. I mean, how many people do you know that actually survived that? It's very hard that you don't get involved more passionately from any part of the company or the developing machine, or anywhere you are in the production machine. You're gonna be more involved if you know somebody that actually lived through it. It's no longer just a number. Then another reason is because survivors understand how trafficking networks actually work from the inside. We all know that companies hire former fraudsters to prevent a fraud. Survivor knowledge is invaluable in prevention and solutions, because we have actually the real experiences. This cannot be learned at university or anywhere. I mean, unless you want to go undercover and just be a trafficker, but that's not very safe, no? Of course, survivors need treatment, training. Obviously, not because you're a survivor, you're gonna be able to improve technology to fight human trafficking and modern slavery. You need to be trained, but all the information that we have from surviving these kind of experiences in any way of exploitation that you may have been through, it's they're really priceless. There is an other way to really get to that level of information, right? It's inside information classified. So obviously this is a real job that survivors can do with the right treatment, because obviously sometimes it's hard. When I started working with survivors at the shelters, I would cry every time after I left the shelter. No, I was like crying and feeling all the emotions. So we need training. We can learn about these new practices, but it's really, really important that the wisdom is used and integrated into technology solutions, policies, responses, even in the shelters. When a shelter, that's what the United Nations said, that the organizations to aid and help victims of human trafficking must be led by survivors, because we don't see other survivors as victims. We see them as human beings that are having a new opportunity to get a new life. If we treat survivors as victims and we just give them what you need and because you suffer so much, then we get victims for life instead of survivors. We need to empower survivors to, in depending of the capacities of everyone, just encourage in one way or the other. Not every one of them is gonna be willing to just be outside and talk about what they live, but if they are willing, if they have the courage, if they wanna fight, if they wanna care of each other, we need to give them the opportunity. And for me, I have had it. I know I have a lot more to learn, and I have had help, but in other ways I have been, and many other amazing survivors that I know, we have been fighting to open a way and a path to be heard and to make changes. And this is not really, my country is not the place that welcomes my knowledge the most. Sometimes other countries, other companies, they are willing to know and to listen to what I have to say, even if I have a broken English, right? So imagine, we have to really be aware of what we have to learn from survivors.
Thank you so much, Carol, for this powerful remarks and for all your insights. And if you would allow me, indulge me a few more minutes, I just want to put one more question to all the panelists. Just as we're closing, if you, in a few minutes, just tell us, why do you think having people such as this audience with data science skills, with AI skills, coming together and fighting against modern slavery, why is it important to have this community in this fight? And finally, if you have any piece of advice for them just before they're starting a long weekend of hacking, looking at these statements, you can start in every order that you like.
I'll just begin. Every one of you on this call has a personal skill, something about you that makes you different. It could be networking, it could be coding, it could be writing, making videos, and so forth. We need those skills. Those skills, if applied to addressing the issue of human trafficking, give us a new perspective, a new way of reaching people. And so it's really important for you to just kind of understand the issue and then see what you can do in order to address it. And sometimes the best solutions and responses come from people who perhaps didn't even get involved in this until now, but they have solutions and approaches that are new to us in the NGO world and within the government world and so forth. So be creative and really put some time and effort into this, because what you come up with may actually make a difference and help people in this situation.
Okay, I will go next. I would say, don't feel overwhelmed by the size of the problem we are facing. I would say start big or start small, but just do the first step and keep doing it, because it's really important for us, but especially for the people we cannot see right now. It could be millions of kids, ladies, and everything you can make or bring into the table will make a big difference to every one of us.
Yeah, I'll go next. I think further to how Karola shared so beautifully, don't forget that behind the data that you're looking into and analyzing over this weekend, there lies someone's story. And you could be part of developing a product that can help people in situations of slavery and violence experience freedom. So be encouraged.
Yeah, I would
And
add,
go-
it's always exciting to see people come together and try and solve problems with technology, and the very fact that you are here, and that you're a part of this shows that you're dedicated to trying to find a solution. You didn't show up at this hackathon by accident. You weren't scrolling the internet tonight and clicked on a link and just showed up here. You're here, and what excites me about things like this is that there are always individuals that participate in things like this that find their purpose. All of you have any number of reasons for wanting to be part of this tonight, or for the next couple of days, but somebody, I guarantee somebody is going to find their purpose. And they're going to dedicate their life to this. And to me, that's always the most exciting thing, to see the outcomes from the participants. The other thing I would add, because we have talked about technology and we've talked about AI and artificial intelligence, I would just say that AI is a tool. That is all AI is. It's a tool. It does not replace the human factor. And you cannot remove humanity from this issue, AI or not. So keep that in mind.
Briony basically stole what I was going to say, but so I'd echo that and say, remember, we want to use the data for positive impacts for people. Like, how can we put people's needs, the experience that people have at the center of it, and use the data to create positive impacts?